Okay. Has everybody checked in? Hello.
No, sir. Just 60 boy.
Okay, they'll join slowly. Let's start now. Uh, today's topic is acute coronary syndrome. I just give you the background first. Now, you all know there are three main coronary arteries: right coronary artery, left main coronary artery, which then divides into anterior descending, circumflex. So these are the main epicardial arteries. And besides that, they also have some branches. When these are disease, we call it coronary artery disease. And the commonest cause for coronary artery disease is atherosclerosis. There may be other unusual causes, but most of the time when you say coronary artery disease, it is atherosclerosis. And this coronary artery disease presents in various forms. Number one, they can present as chronic coronary syndrome. Previously, we used to call it chronic stable angina. Now we call it chronic coronary syndrome, where patient has angina and is going on for years. There is some obstruction in the coronary artery, but nothing acute happens. So we call this chronic coronary syndrome. But something acute can happen in them also. It's not that it doesn't happen at all, but they have it for years going on. The other is acute coronary syndrome. Acute coronary syndrome. Patient has sudden chest pain. They come to the hospital and they are very serious. And unless you do something, the mortality is very high. The long-term prognosis is not good. And they present as unstable angina. They can present as non-ST segment elevation MI. They can present as ST elevation MI. So we'll talk about it later. But some people come with acute problem. Some have chronic problem. Some have acute problem. And also coronary artery disease can present as a heart failure patient. Slowly over years, patient develop heart failure and they come with the dyspnea, swelling, and so they have heart failure. And sometimes, coronary artery disease can give rise to sudden cardiac death, arrhythmia, ventricular tachycardia, some arrhythmia. The heart rhythm becomes disturbed and suddenly patient dies. The commonest cause of sudden cardiac death is coronary artery disease. So they can present in various forms. And today we are talking about acute coronary syndrome. I'll tell you what it is. Now, patients who develops coronary artery disease? Patients who have risk factor. For example, patient has diabetes, patient is a smoker, patient has hypertension, or they have high cholesterol, and they are elderly people, and there's strong family history. We call them as a risk factor. Those who have this risk factor, they go on to develop atherosclerosis, and they develop, which involve the coronary artery. Then they come with heart attack, and then later on, even if they survive, many of them, if not properly managed, they go on to develop ventricular enlargement, heart failure, and death. We call this cardiovascular continuum, one thing leading to another. See? So we have to act right here, so that it doesn't move forward. We try to check this going into this cycle. So I told you coronary artery disease, they can present chronic way, chronic coronary syndrome we call it. And these patients have atherosclerotic plaque in the coronary artery, which may cause angina, but then it doesn't rupture. It doesn't cause acute event mostly. Okay. So chronic coronary syndrome because of stable plaque. Then another presentation is the plaque which is formed there, atherosclerotic plaque inside the coronary artery. They can be unstable. They may be small, but unstable. and they come with acute picture. Patient come to, that's what generally layman people understand as a heart attack. Suddenly chest pain and you rush to the hospital and they put you in ICU, CCU, and manage you. So these are, although they may be small, but then, these are prone to rupture and they cause acute event. So two kinds of plaque: stable plaque, small, hard, fatty core here in the middle, then there is a thick fibrous capsule. They generally don't rupture. They cause chronic problem, chronic coronary artery disease, angina. And there is another plaque known as unstable plaque. This soft fatty core is there, which is big, large, soft fatty core. And this capsule is thin. And they tend to rupture. And when they rupture, they cause acute coronary syndrome. So you have a patient who comes with chest pain, and you suspect acute coronary syndrome. And this acute coronary syndrome are generally two types. One, when the plaque ruptures, it partially occludes the thrombus. It doesn't completely, it partially occludes the vessel. There's a thrombus here. When it ruptures, a thrombus is formed, and it doesn't completely occlude the vessel. So partially occluding thrombus. The other is plaque which ruptures and it completely occludes. So you have a plaque rupturing which is partially occluding. You have a plaque rupturing which completely occludes. So if you have a plaque which is partially occluding, you get T-wave changes like this. There's maybe ST changes like this. There may be depression of ST, there may be inversion of T-wave. When you have complete occlusion, full occlusion, you get ST elevation like this. So complete occlusion, ST elevation. Partial occlusion, then changes are here. So this is what is known as non-ST. So we have two kinds of myocardial infarction. One is non-ST elevation, partially occluding the vessel, causing myocardial infarction. There is complete occlusion, giving rise to ST elevation in the ECG. We call this ST elevation MI. So you have ST elevation MI, you have non-ST elevation MI. Partially occluded, non-ST segment elevation MI. Or another category here is unstable angina, where you see ECG changes, but then you don't find increase in cardiac enzyme. Here you find increase in cardiac enzyme, here you don't find increase in cardiac enzyme. But these patients, although cardiac enzyme is not increased, they have mild ECG changes, they can go on to develop full myocardial infarction. So we have to be careful about this also. So, acute coronary syndrome has spectrum. One is unstable angina, there is ECG change, but no increase in cardiac enzyme. Another, ECG change, some increase in cardiac enzyme, troponin. Then third variety, where ST is elevated because of complete occlusion. These two are partial occlusion of the coronary artery. This one is full occlusion of the coronary artery. Remember that. So when you have partial occlusion of coronary artery, they present with minor ECG changes like these, Here you find T-wave inversion. T-wave inversion. Patient has come with acute chest pain. You don't find much change. And then this is another example where T-wave inversion you see here. Patient has come with acute pain. There is T-wave changes. Normally they should have been upright, but this is going down. So acute pain, T-wave changes. Okay? So it should be either unstable angina, if the enzyme is not raised, if the cardiac enzyme is not raised, or it could be non-ST segment elevation MI because there is no elevation of ST here. In which case there will be increase in cardiac enzyme. Okay. Now, so these are the result of partial occlusion of the coronary artery giving rise to this kind of changes. So you have, again, I want to emphasize, patient comes with chest pain. Now, if it is acute coronary syndrome, then there are some changes in the ECG, mild changes like these. And then it could, if there is no increase in cardiac enzyme, is unstable angina. If you have mild changes, no ST elevation, then it could be non-ST segment elevation MI, but cardiac enzyme is increased. You can see troponin has increased. Or acute chest pain, you find marked ST elevation like this. We call this ST elevation MI, where enzymes are very much raised, very much raised. Troponin enzyme is raised. So this is the spectrum. We are focusing on unstable angina and non-ST segment elevation MI today. Today we talk about this. Another class will talk about ST segment elevation MI. So you have non-ST segment elevation MI, acute coronary syndrome, where there is microinfarct, there is partial occlusion, and the thrombus get displaced. Small thrombus get displaced. They go to the periphery. They cause small infarct, microinfarct. It's not full infarct. And that is why you find ECG changes here, like ST depression or T wave inversion, and then enzyme slightly elevated. You have another variety where there is ST segment elevation, where there is through and through infarct, transmural, through and through infarct. And that is why you have raised ST like this, ST elevation. So this is non-ST segment elevation MI, small microinfarct, some ECG changes, ST depression, T inversion. Here, transmural infarct, through and through infarct, full occlusion of the vessel, and ST elevation, and marked increase in cardiac enzyme. Now focusing on unstable angina, non-ST segment elevation MI. The basic pathology is in all these acute coronary syndrome is a plaque is there. I showed you the picture earlier. It has got a lot of fatty core and then very thin capsule which ruptures. So there is plaque rupture. The moment plaque ruptures, the platelets come there. All platelets start activated, platelet activation, platelet aggregation, and they form the thrombus there. So there is RBCs also, there are platelets also. So you have both components. Very important component is platelet. And simultaneously there may be coronary spasm. Coronary spasm also when the plaque rupture, and all this coronary spasm, platelet all coming and gathering there, and plus also the thrombus, red thrombus form there. So and this causes acute coronary syndrome. So this is typically, there's a big plaque here, thin fibrous capsule, and then this ruptures. When ruptures, you can see all platelet coming and getting aggregated there, and also the RBC thrombus is also forming here. So this is platelet aggregation and the blood getting clot, blood clot getting staying there. So this is what happens. This is how the acute coronary syndrome occurs. The patient comes to us with chest pain, which is central chest pain radiating to the throat, arm, epigastrium, back. Then patient has anxiety, fear of impending death, nausea, vomiting, breathlessness, and they may collapse. And they have signs of sympathetic activation like pallor, sweating, tachycardia. They have signs of vagal activation like vomiting, bradycardia. And if you examine, they may be having hypotension, narrow pulse pressure, JBP may be raised, third heart sound, crepitations in the lung, and they might be having complications in the heart. So all these are features. The most important thing is patient has chest pain. You suspect acute coronary syndrome. The pain is tightness in the chest in the middle like this, which is radiating to the back, jaw. The patient is breathless, sweating, nausea, and then they may be vomiting, anxiety, cough, dizziness. They have tachycardia. You suspect acute coronary syndrome. You do the ECG and you can make out. Now, the question is the difference between unstable angina and non-ST segment elevation MI. When do we call unstable angina? Unstable angina is when patient gets chest pain for a long time, more than 20 minutes. And ECG show change, but there is no increase in cardiac enzyme. Or if the patient already has coronary artery disease and this angina starts to increase, increasing angina. Or the patient has new onset angina and it's severe chest pain, and you do the ECG and you find changes, and but there is no rise in cardiac enzyme. We call it unstable angina. The importance of this unstable angina is many of them, they go on, it progresses. They go on to develop non-ST segment elevation MI or ST segment elevation MI. So you have to recognize them early and treat them. The other is non-ST segment elevation MI, where I told you there is partial occlusion and the thrombus, small part, they get detached, they go to the periphery and they cause microinfarction, usually subendocardial, and this results in rise in cardiac enzyme. The troponin gets elevated. So you have no troponin elevation, some changes in ECG, unstable angina. Increase in troponin, but no ST elevation, is T wave changes and ST changes, we call it non-ST segment elevation MI. Now, what investigation you do in these cases? The most important is we immediately do electrocardiogram, ECG. The moment you suspect acute coronary syndrome, within 10 minutes, preferably within 5 minutes, you should do the ECG. And ECG should be repeated as per necessity. And you see changes like these, see the T wave going down, here T wave change, patient has acute chest pain, you immediately make diagnosis, okay, this is non-ST segment elevation MI. And then you send the blood for troponin. There are other cardiac enzymes like, CK, AST, LDH enzymes. But nowadays we do only one, that is troponin. That's the most important enzyme, and which is when there is myocardial infarction, when there is a microinfarct, then any necrosis in the myocardium, they get released. The troponin get released. Troponin get released from here and from the cardiac myocyte. And if you see the rise of troponin, you should immediately send the rise in troponin. You know that, okay, this is MI or T wave inversion, and then troponin high, we say, okay, this is non-ST segment elevation MI. And troponin is very important. That troponin not only gives you the diagnosis, but also tells you the prognosis later on. More the level of troponin, the more the risk of death. It's seen for 42 days. You see the patient who has high troponin level, higher the troponin level, the more the risk of death later on. So it tells you prognosis, only diagnosis, prognosis. Now, process of the patient, you have to immediately know. We call this risk stratification. For that, we use two kinds of score. One is called score, the other is called Grace risk score. In T, Patient is more than 60. Patient has more than 3 risk factors like hypertension, dyslipidemia, diabetes, smoking, family history. And if patient has previous history of stenosis, there are ST changes in the ECG, patient has been taking aspirin and troponin elevated, and patient had previously history of angina, you give score for each of these points. See, you give score. More than 65 years, 1 point. More than 3 days, 1 point. Known coronary artery disease, 1 point. Aspirin used last 7 days, 1 point. You give score like this, the total score is 7. Total score is 7. See how much is the score. And the higher the score, the more the risk of mortality. If somebody has 6, 7 risk score, the risk of mortality, progressing to myocardial infarction, very high. Very high. So the higher the score, the more the risk. So it will tell you what the risk is. The other score system is known as GRACE score. GRACE score. In GRACE score, we look at several things. We look at breaths and crackles in the lung. Then we classify that Killip class, depending on how much patient breathless and how much crackles are there in the lung. You give the point. Systolic blood pressure, you give the point. Heart rate, you give the point. Age, you give the point. Creatinine level, you give the point. Then besides that, has there been a cardiac arrest, you give the point. ST segment deviation, point. And if the enzyme is elevated, point. So you calculate the point. All these you add. See? You add all these. And then depending on the score, you categorize now. If the score is more than 140, the risk is high. In hospital, mortality is very high, is a high risk. And 6-month risk is also high if there is risk is more than 118, the 6-month risk is also very high. So in hospital mortality, less than 108, low risk. Intermediate risk, 109 to 140. High risk, more than 140. So it tells you the risk. What is the in-hospital death risk of the patient? So you can use 2 scores, TIMI score or GRACE score. They tell you what the prognosis of the patient is. And then you have to decide treatment also according to the risk. So we categorize the patient into very high risk if the GRACE score is more than 140, intermediate risk if the patient has these points, and GRACE risk score is between 109 and 140. And if the patient doesn't have these characteristics, we say patient has low risk. So you have to categorize the patient. Very high risk, intermediate risk, low risk. The best way to do is TIMI score or GRACE score. Now, how do we manage now? Management of these patients are, the moment you diagnose, you have to start the IV line. Immediately start the IV. Number 2, give aspirin immediately, chewable aspirin. Not enteric coated aspirin, chewable. Patients should chew and swallow. 300 milligram aspirin is given immediately. It's antiplatelet agent. I told you there's platelet activation in these patients. You want to reduce that platelet activation. Platelet activation, aggregation are there. And then, of course, it's followed by about 75 to 150 milligram every day you can give later on. But then immediately 300 milligram, patient has to chew and swallow. Then if the patient oxygen saturation is low, less than 90, you give them oxygen. If the patient has chest pain, you should give them nitrate. We give sublingual nitrate initially below the tongue. And if the patient is not relieved of pain, you can give IV nitrate also. Then morphine helps. If there's severe pain, then about 3 milligram morphine intravenously or subcutaneously, if you can give it. That helps in relieving the pain. So these are the various ways to deal right in the beginning. Now,
Excuse me, sir.
you have to, yeah.
सो त्यो
Yeah.
यदि सिस्टोलिक प्रेसर 90 भन्दा कम छ भने उसलाई नाइट्रेटको सट्टा के दिने?
तपाईँले देखिहाल्नुभयो, you can give morphine. If the pressure is very low, then nitrate oral might not affect. You can give oral nitrate, it doesn't change the pressure much, but then IV nitrate should be avoided. IV nitrate.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Now, the most important thing is you have to give anti-thrombotic therapy. You don't want that thrombus to progress and cause complete infarct. You don't want the patient to go into transmural infarct. So, you have to give anti-thrombotic therapy against the thrombus, against the platelet thrombi, against the red thrombus there. So you use antiplatelet agent, which we have already given one, aspirin, and then you have to give anticoagulant also. So you tackle in two ways. Antiplatelet, the platelet activation occurs by various pathways. Thromboxane pathway, then there is ADP pathway by P2Y12 inhibitor. Then there is another pathway known as GP2B3A pathway. So we try to block all this pathway and prevent the platelet aggregation. The aspirin acts at thromboxane pathway and checks the platelet activation aggregation. Then you have other drug, P2Y12 inhibitor like so you have aspirin blocking the thromboxane pathway and preventing platelet aggregation, platelet thrombus. Then you have another pathway, ADP pathway, which is acting to P2Y12. So you give P2Y12 inhibitor, you can inhibit this pathway. You inhibit the ADP pathway. Then there is, I told you, GP2B3A pathway also. But generally, we take these two pathways into consideration. This one very rarely in very high-risk patient, very high-risk patient who are undergoing PCI, then we might think about this. Otherwise, in routine fashion, we give two antiplatelet agent, one P2Y12 inhibitor, the other aspirin taking care of thromboxane pathway. So you have, besides aspirin, which I told you earlier, already given to the patient, now you can use either of these three P2Y12 inhibitors, clopidogrel, prasugrel, or ticagrelor. We are using clopidogrel very commonly along with aspirin because this is the cheapest. We have been using it for many years and is available locally. Ticagrelor, recently it has started to become available, but this is pretty costly. It's good, there's no doubt. Good, found to be better than clopidogrel, but then this is costly. This is costly. So you have a choice: aspirin combined with clopidogrel, aspirin combined with ticagrelor, and but prasugrel not commonly available here, but this is another option you have. So aspirin is given to everyone right in the beginning, 150 to 300 milligram, then followed by maintenance dose of 75 to 100 milligram every day, and you continue it for lifelong continuation. Then one of the P2Y12 inhibitor, either ticagrelor or prasugrel or clopidogrel are given along with aspirin, and you have to continue this for 1 year. Generally for 1 year. We use this combination for 1 year. After 1 year, we stop these P2Y12 inhibitor, we continue with aspirin. So how you manage. And then you have, I told you, GP2B3A inhibitors are also available. They are also antiplatelet agent, but these are used very rarely. They are available, abciximab, and then you have iptifibatide, Tyrovan are there, but they're injectable, very costly, routinely not used in very high-risk patients who are undergoing PCI. In that situation, you might think, otherwise routinely we don't use. And you have to give them anti-anginal drug. As I said, nitroglycerin already have told you. You give 0.4 milligram 3 doses, 5 minutes apart, until the patient pain is relieved. 3 doses. Even with 3 doses, if the patient is not relieved, then you can give IV. Then you can give IV, but then you have to be careful if the patient has hypertension. Now, another is beta blocker. Beta blocker, it helps in relieving the pain. It is an anti-anginal drug. It decreases the cardiac contraction and reduces the heart rate, and therefore, the oxygen demand becomes less. So we initiate beta blocker within first 24 hours, and then we continue on. Generally, we give it for 1 year, 2 years in these patients, but initially its role is giving relief from angina, and the drug we use is sustained release metoprolol, succinate, or carvedilol, bisoprolol are used especially if the patient has reduced systolic function. Patients who have reduced systolic function, you have to give them beta blocker. Now, I told you after anti-anginal, antiplatelet agent, now you have to give anticoagulation. Anticoagulation agents that are available are subcutaneous enoxaparin, low weight molecular heparin, and then the other one is Fondaparin or Bivalirudin. These are generally not used. We are not using in our setup. Commonly, we are using either Fondaparin or enoxaparin. These are low molecular weight heparin, and you may give unfractionated heparin also, but commonly we use subcutaneous enoxaparin. That is what we have been using most commonly, low molecular weight heparin, and the dose you can look up later on. So you have to give parenteral anticoagulation. Fondaparin or enoxaparin are the one commonly used, but you have other choices also here, and Bivalirudin is not even available here, but generally I told you the drug to use is Fondaparin, it is available here, or enoxaparin. So you have taken care of, by anticoagulation, red thrombus, you have taken care of antiplatelet, given antiplatelet agent, taken care of platelets. So you have to give, antithrombotic drug are anticoagulant and antiplatelet. Antiplatelet aspirin plus one of these one very rarely, and anticoagulant, Fondaparin or low molecular weight heparin, and nowadays we have rivaroxaban also. Rivaroxaban, this is also available. You may use it, but then routinely we are using one of these. So the important for you to remember is you have to give anticoagulant, you have to give antiplatelet. Both groups of drug has to be given. Now you have to decide what to do. You have given the medical treatment now, all right. But that alone is not sufficient. If the patient is high-risk patient, intermediate risk patient, very high-risk patient, that is not sufficient. You have to go for invasive strategy now. You have to do revascularization. In a very high-risk patient, intermediate risk patient. In low-risk patient, you may postpone revascularization, and but then later on you can evaluate and decide. But in other groups, you have to go for revascularization. And there are two types of revascularization, either percutaneous intervention stenting, or bypass grafting. Generally, percutaneous intervention and stenting are done. And for that, you have to first, so that's why initially it was so important for you to categorize the patient. That is why it becomes important. Right in the beginning, you categorize the patient. Who has got the GRACE score more than 140 or between 109 and 140. So you categorize the patient, and accordingly, you have to decide the revascularization. When to do it is also decided by the risk, which I'll tell you. Now, as I said, revascularization strategy, two types: percutaneous PCI, percutaneous coronary intervention, or bypass grafting. If the patient has, triple vessel disease or left main artery is affected, then you generally go for bypass. Otherwise, routinely percutaneous intervention is what is done. Now, for that, you have to do coronary angiogram. Without coronary angiogram, you don't know which coronary artery is affected. Therefore, you angiogram. This is how the coronary angiogram looks like. You just see here. This is the left main artery, then left descending, left circumflex. You can see obtuse, marginal, different branches are shown. You inject the dye into the coronary artery. So you can identify all branches. Right coronary artery, posterior descending. So when you identify these arteries, see where the obstruction is, and wherever the obstruction is, now you pass in a wire across it, then you do the ballooning, you pass the balloon, you inflate the balloon, then leave the stent and you open it. So you have PCI, then if PCI is not possible, if patient has triple vessel disease, left main affected, PCI difficult, then you go for coronary artery bypass grafting. So, the important thing is, I told you, decide right in the beginning what is the risk. If the patient has very high risk, you have to do it within 2 hours. PCI. If the patient has high risk, you have to do it within 24 hours. If the patient has intermediate risk, you have to do it within 72 hours. If the patient has low risk, you can evaluate later on and then decide about revascularization. So low risk patient can wait, but these patients cannot. Higher the risk, the earlier you have to do. Immediately you have to do within 2 hours if the patient is very high risk. Within 24 hours, if the patient has Grace score more than 140, high risk patient. Intermediate risk patient, Grace score between 109 and 140, within 72 hours you have to do. If the patient is low risk, you can wait, you can evaluate later on, and then decide about revascularization. Okay? So now, after you have done the revascularization, you have to discharge the patient now. What are the things that you look for? You have to protect the patient's coronary artery for future events now. You have to protect the patient for future acute coronary event. So for that, most important thing is lifestyle modification. Exercise, weight control, diet, everything very, very important. This is the backbone. Number two, you must lower the lipid lowering. You have to give statin and make sure that their LDL is less than 50. Blood pressure, if the patient has high pressure, hypertension, you have to control it, bring it below 130 by 80 usually. At least 140 by 90, less than 140 by 90, preferably 130 by 80, less than that. If the patient is diabetic, sugar should be controlled very well. And you should continue with dual antiplatelet agent, aspirin plus clopidogrel or aspirin plus ticagrelor for 1 year, after which you can drop clopidogrel or ticagrelor and continue with aspirin forever. So the various combinations that we use is clopidogrel or aspirin, ticagrelor plus aspirin. These are the general. Nowadays, people have started using rivaroxaban and aspirin combination also. Nowadays, because it is an anticoagulant, but also has antiplatelet activity and is considered to be very good. This combination also considered to be good. So aspirin, you have to continue lifelong. And P2Y12 inhibitor you give for 12 months only. Clopidogrel, ticagrelor you give for 12 months only. Beta blocker, especially if left ventricular function is depressed, then you continue it. ACE inhibitor, ARB, especially if the patient's left ventricular function is not good. If there's systolic dysfunction, we give it. And similarly, aldosterone antagonist, eplerenone or spironolactone, all these three drugs are given, especially if the patient's left ventricular function is depressed. And statin forever. Must keep LDL cholesterol less than 70. And of course, life is very, very important. So this is basically what I have told you. This is what we do. I've just told you this is how you manage. And pressure at least less than 140, but preferably less than 130 should be there. Okay. I think we're done with acute coronary syndrome, unstable angina and non-ST segment elevation MI. Next class will be on